of all, Stackroot, thanks for this opportunity. Um, this is the first slide, which talks about data products and data mesh. Now, the one which I've put on the top, right, that's not a spelling mistake. Data mess, right? So this is what most enterprises have today. It's a data mess. So somebody thought that, my data warehouse on-premise is to blame for all my, business complaints about quality of data. And I'm running a lot of cost on supporting the data warehouse. Let me move to cloud. So they moved to cloud. So they had a real database. Then on top of it, somebody thought that we should have a GraphQL database. We should have a graph database. And then there was a competition with another team who wanted a NoSQL database. So those became cool databases, right? And then finally, there were some data engineers, right? I mean, they were sort of feeling bored. They started building pipelines connecting cool databases to real database. And every new request from business ended up with a new pipeline. That's what a real data mesh is about. Now, what is the business aspiration? You ask any CXO, they'll say, I want a single source of truth. Right, so if you go to a bank, you go for a loan, my name would be Balaji Raghunathan, Balajee Raghunathan. From the same bank, I take a credit card, my name would be Balaji Raghunathan. They'll not be able to detect that I'm the same customer because it's just a matter of two letters, right? JI and JEE. Right? So that's because they don't have a single source of truth. That's the first problem. The second problem is very interesting, right? Like, so people talk about data-driven decision making. What they mean by data-driven decision making is like everybody should be able to look at data and be able to decide on what is right and what is not right. But there is a typical cultural issue when it comes to data-driven decision making. Most of the CXOs do not want access to data, for the lower level employees. So then there is no data democratization. There's no data-driven decision making. But data-driven decision making is a key problem. The second thing is like very interesting, right? Self-service BI. So everybody talks about, I want Power BI, I want Tableau. Why? Because they want self-service Power BI. And what's the reason for the self-service Power BI? I want a report. And as business, I know Dr. Palapsa mentioned about no business and IT, right? But as business, I want a report. What the IT team does is like, they take 3 months, they'll build a pipeline, then they'll give you some reports, right? And then again, they'll also say that you can use this in Power BI. But then the end business users, they don't know even how to use Power BI, right? Finally, they'll take Excel and then they'll use it. So this self-service BI, how do they get in as part of their enterprise? That's the third problem. The last one is, of course, this data democratization. Again, everybody should have access to data, but that should be in a secure way. How do you get this? So thanks to Forrest Brazil for this data mesh diagram. I took it from his LinkedIn post. He's from Google. So this is where we look at data mesh as a possible solution. Sorry. Yeah. So if you look at how data architecture has evolved, we started about 20 years back with something called ODS, right? Operational data store. Then somebody thought that we should move towards a data warehouse. Data warehouse is good. So because you have a central data repository, you have then basically data marts coming out of it. So for finance, you have a finance data mart. For retail, you have a retail data mart. Now, again, people could only do descriptive reporting out of it. So, I want what happened in the past, I can get a report. How do I get a report of what is happening currently? Can I mix my third-party data with my enterprise data? So that's where this whole concept of data lake began. But again, by data lake, right, the main thing was the attraction was the cloud, right? In cloud, your data storage is really cheap. So what enterprises thought is that I'll put all my data in my enterprise onto the cloud. So everybody put all that data onto cloud, and the data lake became a data swamp, right? So nobody knew, to get access to data, it was so hard for people. So that's where, finally the same problem, whatever the enterprises were faced with, that is poor data quality, inconsistent data, and this difficulty in integrating data from multiple sources, all those persisted. On top of it, the main problem was who owns this data. If something is wrong, who has to correct this data? That's where there was a major problem. Now, this is again the typical business IT clash, right? So a business, what they want, right? They just want trusted data. That's what they ask. But when the word data comes to a data team, immediately people start thinking about pipelines. Okay, I need to build a pipeline. So that's where, so then there is this ETL, should be ELT, should I build a data science model? That's what happens, right? So that's where, if you look at, there is a divergence between business and there's a divergence between what the data engineer, what the business wants and what the data engineer thinks. So this is essentially the key problem, right? So if you look at what is the key problem, right? Somebody mentioned that data is a fuel, and people literally think of fuel, right? That's why from fuel started pipelines. And so that's why the ETL, somebody told data is the fuel, so data engineers build pipelines, right? So everything was looked at only from an infrastructure perspective. So what do you do with pipeline? I mean, like, if you think of fuel, you just want diesel or you just want, petrol, and you just use it, right? So you don't want, something like, the speed petrol, or, you're not particular about, green, maybe tomorrow you may have a green petrol, right? So that is where this whole concept of data product is coming. So now, till yesterday, maybe this happened in the 90s, right? Anybody with any salt was okay. After that, it was about Tata salt. So what is Tata salt? It is just the same raw salt, but it's packaged well. And there is some repeatability to it. There is some trust which people have. So when you've been thinking all along about data, as a fuel, how do you shift that mindset to, data as a product? That's what data mesh is all about. Right. So this data mesh, I've been telling this to a lot of people. What happens in infra, the next thing which happens to apps is basically what happens from infra. The next thing what happens to data world is what happened in the apps world, right? So in the apps world, you had this whole concept of microservice. So relate this microservice to what you have as a data product. What is a data product, right? It is something which is independently deployable, which is something repeatable. Like every time I run a query, I don't get a different result, right? Then there is trust in the data. I believe that this data is correct. If I query a different system, I get the same data. So that is what a data product is all about. So data product is whatever you do today plus the non-functional requirements about the independent deployment, independently deployable, the secure mechanism of delivering data. So basically, you're getting into an outside-in thinking. So as basically a customer, I can actually tell what is this data product all about. I now want to know what is inside. So that's where that outside-in thinking comes. That's where the data product as a concept comes in. So that's what is data product all about. So the next part is about, because data has been treated as an asset, nobody shares data. But now we are talking about sharing data. So now when you want to share data, you need to actually, secure that data. It needs to be independently deployable. It should not fail, right? It should be reliable. So that's where you have this concept of, again, data product being shareable coming into picture. So now, basically, Zamak Devgani, she was from ThoughtWorks. She used to work with Martin Fowler, right? So what she saw is consistently the data lakes failed when it comes to deliver data at scale. So that's where this whole concept of data mesh came into picture. So in the application world, the application architecture world, you have something called the service mesh. So the data mesh is the equivalent of the service mesh, and the data product is the equivalent of your microservice. So how does a data mesh architecture look like? So here, one of the key concepts is, the domain data sets. In the microservice world, you start with, modeling from your domain, right? Domain-driven modeling. That's what is the first part when it comes to your data product modeling. So you start with domain. So basically, that's one part. Second part is, I again go back to what Dr. Pallab was talking in the morning, right? So there is a difference between decentralized ownership to a centralized ownership to a federated ownership. So if you look at India, India is a federal ownership kind of government, right? You have certain rules which comes in from the central government, but the people who are actually deciding, taking decisions, they are in the state government. That's what data mesh is all about when it comes to ownership. So essentially it is federated governance. So one of the problems what used to happen in the data lake world is it was a centralized governance, right? So any decision, what needs to be taken, all the ownership was all with the central team of data scientists or central data organization. So this made data quality very slow. So it was not set for scale. That's where this federated governance comes into picture. So essentially 4 concepts, 4 principles of data mesh. One is data should be a product, data as a product, not as a byproduct. So when you say as a byproduct, that's where this fuel comes in. The next one, federated governance. Third is the ownership is with the decentralized organizations. So your business can own its data, your finance owns its data. Then the last part is the self-service platform. That's where you have a centralized platform. Now, if you look at how the data mesh architecture looks like, this is a reference model, right? So you have the enterprise data layer. On top of it, you have your domain data sets and your centralized automated data infrastructure. So that's where your data product layer starts from, right? So your data products consume from the centralized data structure. So on top of it, you should be able to discover data, share data, publish data. So that's where the data cataloging comes in. So whatever data product you build in, that should be registered with your data catalog so that somebody who wants to actually access your data would be able to look at the catalog, get that data. But data mesh has been done in a lot of large organizations, but they have not been successful because you need a lot of mindset shift. So when you look at data mesh, what you need to think about is in terms of your data producers, your data consumers, and the concept of data contracts. It's just like the service world, right? So you have a service contract. So essentially all that below that you have this data catalog and data observability. So that's what gives you that trust. That's what gives you that reliability. That's how you're able to discover, share, and publish data. So that's about data mesh and data products. There are 2 other parallel concepts which are quite popular. One is the lakehouse architecture, the other is a data fabric architecture. But both of them don't talk about governance. That's why I felt that data mesh is something which is going to be more successful. because data governance is the key issue today. Any questions? Yeah, so you have, I mean, again, what data mesh does is it's a pattern, right? It's an architectural pattern. It provides you guidances. So one is, of course, like those 4 principles what I listed, right? So you need to ensure that there is, decentralized data ownership, but federal governance. So you need a culture layer, you need an organizational shift. Then apart from that, you need a data platform which provides self-service BI, right? And there is no recommendation in terms of what should be your underlying platform. So for example, you can build a data mesh architecture on Azure Synapse. You can also build it on, say, Snowflake. And again, the same thing, Snowflake can be used even for Lakehouse architecture. They can also be used for data mesh, right? So essentially, it is about how do you build in governance, how do you build that business data connectivity, and how you are able to deliver as data products instead of just a data table or some API. So basically, that data product is the key stepping stone to move towards a data mesh kind of organization. Yeah, it's an enterprise initiative. Largely, your business is the owner here, and your data mesh will work only if the entire businesses want to get into this kind of model. So the stakeholders are largely business. In fact, there is if you look at LinkedIn nowadays, people put their names as data product manager and data product owners. So a lot of people, so those data product owners, they are largely the business teams.
Thank you so much, Balaji.